Why does Breach suck? It's pretty much an question that I've got a couple times when talking about Breach in some of my tier lists. And I want to make a video on why I think he sucks in his current form. Obviously, as this is the Riot game, everything is subject to change, and Breach is no different. So hopefully he receives some more changes. He has actually seen a resurgence recently in the 2023 season, I think, with he's been playing on Haven again a bit, which honestly, to my dismay, I don't think he's very good on Haven, and it's surprising that he ever gets played on Haven to me. I'm going to be talking about Fracture mainly though. I will maybe talk about Haven at the end. We'll see. Depends on how long this goes for. So first of all, we're going to talk about like overall things with Breach. So first of all, I want to say that he's fairly straightforward. In fact, I think he's one of the easier agents to pick up and play. The reason being for that is that a lot of his stuff is actually positively limited to learn. So what that means is that you can sort of just use the geometry of the map to flash. You don't have to learn any lineups. You don't have to learn any ways to like bounce flashes perfectly so they detonate perfectly or anything like that. He's sort of limited, and that's also sort of like a positive for learning him, but a negative for how far he can actually go in being strong. So we'll talk a bit more about that, especially with his flash. But right now, I'm just going to talk about one other thing, which is limiting him, which is sort of like because his abilities are fairly ingrained in positioning with the geometry of the map, so with the walls and the boxes and everything like that. He can be finding himself out of position a lot to actually get his value, and that can be quite detrimental considering you can pick something else like KO and play in position and with the rest of your team and still have similar value to Breach. And I'll say similar value, not the same value. So Breach does have some unique things to him, which is why I feel like he is getting played a bit, because he basically has unique things to him that no other agent can fully replicate, and I think people will be drawn to that, despite his flaws. So we're going to talk about his abilities one by one, and then I'll sort of like wrap things up. So first things first, we're going to talk about his signature ability, which is Fault Line. And Fault Line is an interesting ability. You'll see it mainly used in this position. Okay, and you'll see it basically used a lot in this sort of position to stun this on Fracture. And that is honestly a pretty good use in ranked, right? You can see it also over here somewhere as well. I'm not sure exactly with the Fracture changes if he's being used to do this strat anymore, probably, to be honest. A lot of his defense stuff has got worse, like the wising of this made it worse to this. This actually got better for Dish. It actually got better for Dish because of the lack of like the space. But overall, his front line has is pretty reliable in what it wants to do. So the main thing it wants to do is it wants to push someone from the angle that they're on, right? Because if you want to push someone out of the A main angle, then you can just fault line this, right? And it has some problems to it. So they can dodge it by sitting there and then swing right after the stun. By sitting right here, right, and then they can just like dodge after, and then they can just like go into it after it's stunned in that area. So people tend to like combine this with Neon and things to sort of plug that hole and make it a bit easier to attack this area in combination with each other. But the biggest place where this has its unique part, which is against operators, as operators can't scope in, so therefore they basically can't get a kill unless it's point blank, or they get very, very lucky somehow with a no scope from a decent range. But I don't think anyone would even go for that because of how unlikely that would be. So basically he's good at pushing operators off angles. That's one of his like main niches that he has right now. The problem overall with his fault line as well, that he has another one, is that it's tied to the stun mechanic. And the stun mechanic is probably one of the weakest CCs overall, because it doesn't quite CC them. It's not quite as severe as it probably should be. So obviously, I don't think it's going to be. I don't think it would need to have a massive nerf or massive buff. I guess massive buff to the stun. Just a very slight one because it seems like it's a bit too consistent. It's a bit too consistent to kill people while you're stunned. A bit too consistent. I think maybe the first bullet should not be accurate when stunned. Because I think that's the main problem right now. Because the first bullet is actually accurate when stunned, I'm pretty sure. And that might have been changed a tiny bit, so it may be a bit more inaccurate now. I can't quite remember the changes. But it is too accurate, the first bullet for sure is. And if someone is spraying, then maybe it's a bit too accurate overall in the spray. So it's one of those two. But the first bullet definitely needs to be less accurate. And if we keep going to compare this to the rest of the roster that could potentially take over his slot, there's plenty of agents that have a lot more value in their signature. So the signature ability is the one that goes on cooldown. And when I think of other signature abilities and initiators, and even basically just initiators, the ones that are on cooldown. So Fade, I'm probably gonna want to take Haunt over Breach most of the time, over Breach's fault line over most of the time. Maybe not on Fracture, but on Sova. Sova, I'm gonna want to take his Recon Arrow most of the time. KO Knife, I'm gonna want to take most of the time. And Skybird is probably a 50-50, but it does give you more reliable information than Fault Line does, which is Fault Line tends to be very awkward when trying to give you information, as you rely on the footsteps of the enemy, and by that I mean you rely on the stun, put them in the situation where they can dodge it and they feel they need to dodge it. Otherwise, like if you stun them in a random position, they're just not going to move. They're gonna, especially if you're on defense and you're fault lining somewhere, the attackers might just stay still, tank the stun, and assume and they might just think like no one's going to go aggressive to this point. And by the time they get there, we would have heard them the whole time and will be unstunned. So we're just not going to move, and then we won't give them information. And you'll see it actually a lot when breaches tend to stun a main at the start of a round. They'll either dodge the stun, but sometimes even if when like they get surprised and they don't expect the stun to be here, plenty of people won't even. There'll be people that won't even dodge this. They'll just tank it, and then just like move around the corner while stunned, or they'll try and sit here. They'll walk through the stun towards safety. They won't even give you information, and that can be like a big problem with Breach. That he's not very reliable in that sense. You have to use him to set up another player most of the time, for it to be actually good. And obviously that's completely different for the other agents that I listed in the initiator role. Obviously Phoenix plays a bit differently, where he needs to get kills to reset his signature, and I think his signature sucks anyway. So he definitely doesn't have the worst in that slot. If you can even consider Phoenix going into his slot on Fracture, it is potential. There is potential there for Phoenix, but I'm not sure exactly if he would fit in the Breach slot. I mean, I know 100% no, without testing anything. And that's basically what I want to talk about with Fault Line. Definitely adds to his weakness, but I don't also know how they would have to change it. I think they would have to just make stunning more reliable and really put him into the I'm going to stun and play support for my teammates sort of archetype. So next thing is the Flash. I think I can't remember what the Flash is actually called. Flashpoint. I keep getting it confused because I keep thinking that the knife is called 0 Point, so this can't be called Flashpoint, but it is called Flashpoint. Okay. So the first things first is I'm going to go visit back to what I said at the start, where he's sort of very easy to play because of his limitations. And this is one of those abilities that are incredibly easy to use because of its limitations. And that also limits it from being good. In the high reloads especially. Because its main problem is that it's tied to walls. And because it's tied to walls, it can't get any variation aside from where it is on the wall. And so that means that the fuse time is always going to be consistent. And you don't want the fuse time to be consistent. A fuse time, like the flash time, like the time you see the flash from when it detonates, you don't want that to be particularly consistent. KO doesn't want it consistent when he flashes. Phoenix doesn't want it consistent when he flashes. And there's plenty of other flashes. Sky definitely doesn't want it consistent when she flashes either. because you don't want to give the enemy a consistent timing to dodge your flashes, and Breach has that 100% of the time. So what I mean by that is when KO used to do his pop flashes, or still does, they got a bit weaker, but they're still good. You want to make sure that it pops right on the corner because it basically is impossible to dodge. But on the flip side, he can fake a flash with throwing it out really far and then pushing out before the flash actually detonates, and the enemy might actually try and turn the flash at the same time as you peeking, and they have no way to retaliate because they've just turned away, right? They're like, and that's just like one example. It's very unlikely that honestly that scenario would happen, but it still is a potential scenario, right? And even something not even as drastic as that, you just the flash on the corner, so they literally can't dodge is actually enough of a variation from like what you could consider the normal top flash from KO, which is like you can see it for a bit and then it flashes, as opposed to just insta flashing on the corner. That's enough of a variation to consider KO's flash stronger than Breach's, because Breach's doesn't have any type of variation that you can implement as the player playing the Breach. There's no way that you can shorten the fuse time. The only way you can kind of do this in a way is to put the flash in a place where they have a harder time reacting to the visual. So you put it on the edge of their screen rather than the center of their screen. That's what Breach has, and it's a lot harder to do that. Just straight up a lot harder to do that. Compared to what you can do on KO. Even with left clicks, you can do it too, by bouncing off the wall, and then it detonates on the corner again. You can do it with Phoenix, you can do it with Skye. You can do it with basically everyone that has a flash, with like some sort of free element to it. And yeah, Phoenix doesn't really have too much of a free element to his. Like, it is kind of like on rails the way it comes out and curves. But you can use distance to detonate it on the corner sometimes of the wall, and sometimes you have enough space to like do like a weird bounce on the corner, so it just comes off the bounce on top of the corner and flashes someone. Bear in mind that's pretty bad most of the time because I can hear it and it's really loud. The next thing with Breach's flash is that it is bound to the walls in general. So that means that you can't just flash, you have to use a wall. And if you don't have any walls near you that are relevant to you and you're in a tight situation, then you won't be able to flash. And that's kind of it for the flashes. I think Breach overall has the weakest flashes in the game, and I've said that for a while, and it's not even close. It's literally not even close. I don't know how they're going to fix it either. It may be based. I think that maybe they should base the flash time on travel time. So maybe if he's really far away, then the flash goes off really, really fast. Because that way it would also help him with the fault line positioning as well, where he's quite far back to fault line his team, and then he can also flash for his team far back, so then it gets a really fast flash coming out the wall. I think that would actually be a really good idea to buff Breach's flashes, but that's like the only way I can think of. And it would also match him in a way, like his archetype, where he would be that support type, where he would sit back and use his util to help his team that are going forward. But the thing is that if that happens, the way he's going to be incentivized to play at that point, especially if they decide to nerf him close flashing as well, then he's going to be higher up in the competitive viability, but lower down in the solo queue viability. So that would probably be the problem they'd face by doing that change. But obviously, I don't know without them doing that change, and they might have a complete different design philosophy around Breach that I don't know of. But that would be the way I would move in that direction, at the detriment to solo queue Breach. So the next thing is going to be Aftershock, which is probably his best basic ability. As I think Rolling Thunder is a pretty good ability. So Aftershock. So it's basically a fast molly, where it deals a lot of its damage over a short amount of time, or it just deals its damage over a short amount of time. I can't remember. I don't know the actual time. It's probably like 4 seconds or 3 seconds, 5 seconds, somewhere like that. It's definitely shorter than a normal molly. But the best part about it is that it is fast. So it is like front-loaded damage. So they can't just like tank part of the molly to get like that last few bits of the half or the last few bits of the defuse. They have to tank, like they basically can't tank it, and they've basically wasted the time defusing. because they would die as a result, maybe to get that use, and they can't die if they're like the last one alive, or maybe they're in a 2v2 and it'd be a bit stupid to die for the half and leave your teammate in a 1v2 where they might just lose it anyway, when they're in a disadvantage. And that's like one of the biggest parts of Aftershock that's like the best part of Aftershock. Probably the worst part of Aftershock is the positioning you may have to use for it to be particularly strong, right? So we're going to look at Fracture on A, right? So this plant, there's the spike. Where's the spike on this? Okay. So we put the plant here, right? The problem is with Breach is that if he plays normal positioning in this scenario, he could play on site, but if he's the one with the molly, then he's going to want to play here, right? Brims would play here, KO would play here, right? And even Phoenix would play here. Actually, I'm not sure Phoenix's molly would reach. He would have to be here probably. Okay, that's besides the point anyway. But it's very, very difficult for the Breach to actually get an Aftershock that has enough. So it looks good here, right? But I'm pretty sure that if you put it on this corner, it doesn't fully cover the bomb for someone to defuse. I'm pretty sure in reality it doesn't do that. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't. I could definitely be wrong. And that means that the Breach, so I haven't seen anyone do this properly. Thinking about it, maybe I probably could be wrong. And so the problem with Breach is that he can't play this position, which is like the average position, right, for this. And there's no other place on the map that this is planted for, right? So if you go sand, it's not planted for him. So all he can do is use the Aftershock. And if his teammates get pushed in the meantime and die here, then he's in a very losable situation, right? He doesn't have the eyes on the bomb. There's probably 2 players here, and if they have any way to cross without fighting him, then it's probably a lost round. And the same if you go on to Dish as well, especially because on Dish, it's a lot more unrealistic that he will be here if he just supported his team going into a main. That now all of a sudden he's also Dish, unless I guess he could have crossed site, but that's probably also unrealistic for him to actually go up into Dish from on site, unless he has an immense amount of time to do so. And he also doesn't have feel like there's any risk in Dish. So then he would have to support his team going into A and then go across the ropes and then go Dish. And then on top of that, he would then use Aftershock on his on the bomb. Actually, you'd kind of do it like this, I think. And then he would have to play from Dish, but it's not planted for him. So he would have to make a play on the people defusing to then contest the bomb again after Aftershock. So it's almost like he puts himself in a bad position most of the time to play for Aftershock in post plan, right? And at that point, what's the point in having Aftershock when you should probably just play like this anyway? It'd be easier to defend the bomb. And then you would have to like mix up the plant and put it maybe here, right? Which is a harder plant to get because you'd have to maybe trick the enemy team into thinking you're going B, so then there's not many people contesting, and then you would have to put maybe a wall here so that you don't get spammed through by the one player in CT. So there's like plenty of obstacles to planting for an Aftershock Breach sometimes. And even then, like this planting, I mean, actually, no, this plant's fine, right? Because you can Aftershock like this from here, so it's completely fine. So, but you have to get this plant right, and that's the hard part. So you have to kind of jump through hoops, right? And obviously, the default plant is actually better for Breach because you can play like this, right? But there's no way you're going to contest the bomb after the Aftershock because they can defuse it for free, and you have to make a play to go out on site. So you can see, like positioning wise, he tends to be a bit of a hindrance to himself by having Aftershock, and at that point, you either what's the point in having Aftershock, or what's the point in playing for Aftershock if it's so much harder? Like it's just so much harder. Like otherwise, like you have to make plays to then, like after Aftershock or maybe during Aftershock to actually make this play overall worthwhile anyway. So it's just kind of very weird overall, and his positioning doesn't help you that much. Other than his because the way you have to play with his abilities, and the way that the game is played normally and logically, don't line up as much as you probably want it to. Especially if you want to keep Breach for the afterplant situations, which a lot of teams like to do, because he has fault line, he has Aftershock. So these two abilities can really threaten people the bomb. And by the way, his aftershock only sorry, not his aftershock. His fault line is only threatening if there's someone to actually contest the bomb at the same time as the stun. Otherwise, it's not that threatening because the stun doesn't do anything by itself. So overall, like, Breach needs to be able to have sightline on the bomb most of the time at the same time as having a wall that he can aftershock with. So he can be a bit awkward and can also mess up your own positioning to get value from him. And therefore, I don't think he's really that strong. Like, if you think about it, if I was playing KO in this situation, I don't have to do anything like go over here or go over here or go over here or anything like that, right? All of my util is throw a ball onto the bomb and like has impact onto the people trying to defuse from a main. So I don't need to care about going to another position. While Breach may need to actually flank like this. And bear in mind that if you are flanking through sand to then aftershock the bomb, there is a decent chance that most teams or a lot of teams will retake main through sand. So this Breach would have to work with his team to then contest sand and win sand and then be able to aftershock this. So it's definitely a lot harder to play Breach the way that he feels like he should pilot or should play, because he has a lot of extra hoops to jump through, and then at the top of that, he's out of position. So it just feels like there's no point in playing Breach if you have access to KO. Like, if you can play KO, why play Breach? Like, that's kind of like the question that I want to ask, right? And the only agent that I feel like you don't play Breach over, or no, that you don't overwrite with Breach, overwrite against Breach, I don't even know how to say that sentence, is Skye. So basically, you don't play Skye over Breach. Because I feel like Skye isn't enough of a replacement to Breach and isn't enough of a strong agent to replace the other options you may have in that slot, right? And I don't even think that Fade is particularly a 1-for-1 replacement to Breach. I think she's actually really good with Breach. You do actually see her a lot to cover Breach's weaknesses, or some of his weaknesses at least, such as like the inability to get like solid information, and can also make his Rolling Thunder, which we'll go on to next, a lot more strong, because you don't really need to like properly check into them, if that makes sense. You can kind of like pre-fire, shoot them through walls and things because they're lower HP. That sort of stuff overall makes the fight so much easier. If you want to stack them on top of each other anyway. But Fade can like allow Breach to like hold his Rolling Thunder for post plant or vice versa, right? So there's like plenty of like synergies they have. Especially because Breach really likes to know where people are when he's fault lining. So then he can like wait for the reveal, then fault line the person, and then the duelist can go kill them. Sort of deal. That can also work as well. That's why this pairing is so good. And I actually think that he does have merit when Fade's being played with him. But I think overall, like, some of his weaknesses, like I've said, like Tavri taking this sort of space and playing post plant, can also resurface and make it a bit more like not as useful to play in comparison with KO. And don't get me wrong as well, KO Fade do have their merit to play together as well, and the same with the KO Sova as well. Obviously not on Fracture, but these two also are really, really strong, potent together. So I don't feel like there's a reason to play Breach over KO most of the time, personally. For some of the reasons I've just outlined. And one more reason is I've just opened it. One more reason is also the ult. Actually, I think the ult overall is pretty good. So Rolling Thunder is a fairly strong ult, actually. Because it's actually pretty reliable. The only unreliable thing about Rolling Thunder is that it relies on the stun mechanic for it to be strong. And the stun mechanic is on the weaker side, in my opinion. So it kind of relies on that a tiny bit, but it does have the displacement. So if someone is currently diffusing, they will get knocked off the diffuse. And the same with, like, you know, if they're if you like time it quite right, especially with like a Neon or a Jet, that can like to capitalize on the actual displacement itself by dashing in or running in after the Rolling Thunder, then you can actually catch enemies while they're in midair, and it's a lot harder for them to shoot you, even while stunned as well. It can still happen, but I would say that's cosmically unlucky to happen. It may be a bit too consistent with the amount of times I see it, but at the same time, there's thousands and thousands of games played, so it's got to happen once or twice. It's going to happen. I say once or twice. It's going to happen a lot. A decent amount, a fair amount. If there's so many games being played, so it does make sense. But I do think the stun overall needs to be stronger. So maybe just a bit harsher on the first bullet, or maybe the first couple bullets, and then maybe the stun like fades out, so then it gets stronger, like weaker and weaker. The stun does to a point where you're shooting normally. I think it might actually do that anyway. And that's basically it, I think. So overall, those are my reasons to why I think Breach is weak. So it's all about his positioning, and some of his abilities are limited by their sort of easiness to use. So especially his flash. His flash is very easy to use, but it can be hindered because of it, because it doesn't really have a solid way to consistently flash people if they are very adept at playing with it and playing against it and dodging it and things like that. It can't mix itself up, so it's very, very difficult to get value from. And his fault line is probably one of the weakest signatures in the game, for quite a few reasons, but mainly because obviously he's battling for a slot, and if his signature's not that good, then it doesn't make sense for you to play him that much. Because a lot of the signatures that you see from initiators, that ones on cooldown, they are aimed at taking space, and while fault line can take space, first of all, it doesn't take very much of it, and secondly, it doesn't really do much by itself when taking space. You need to combine it with another initiator, and at that point, sometimes it can just be better to play the 2 better initiators or 3 better initiators that better than him at taking that space anyway. And then he has to also misposition in post plant sometimes with his aftershock to actually get value from his aftershock. So what was the point in having aftershock if you're going to play normally, or you might as well play, or you're going to play out of position with the aftershock? It's very, very hard to play Breach overall because he's weak, but a lot of his utility itself is straightforward to use. So overall, that's why I find Breach to be bad. That's why I think he sucks. If you have any questions about if he why he sucks or not, and I didn't do a very good job of articulating it, I'm not the best at articulating my points. I will say, be the first one to say that. So yeah, if you want to see more, then subscribe and ding the bell. And give it a like if you don't have to agree, but give it a like if you thought that some of my reasoning was pretty good, or maybe you disagree, and if you disagree, I would love to hear why in the comments. Yeah, thanks for watching, and I will see you in my next one.